When you think about the collapse of Rome, you probably imagine barbarian hordes storming the gates, corrupt emperors poisoned in marble halls, or legions abandoning their posts. But here's what most people miss. Rome didn't fall because of external enemies. It fell because of something far more insidious, something that ate away at the empire's foundation for centuries before the first barbarian ever crossed the Rhine. Rome fell because its leaders destroyed the very thing that made the empire possible in the first place, its money. This isn't just ancient history. The financial forces that brought down the greatest empire in human history are the same forces that have toppled nations throughout the ages. And if you understand how Rome's monetary system collapsed, you'll recognize patterns that echo through every major economic crisis that followed. For over 4 centuries, Rome's economic backbone was a single silver coin, the denarius. First minted around 201 before Christ, this coin was nearly pure silver, trusted across 3 continents, and accepted from Britain to Egypt. Roman soldiers were paid in denarii. Merchants demanded them. Ordinary citizens saved them. The denarius wasn't just money, it was confidence made tangible, the physical embodiment of Roman power and stability. But here's where the story gets interesting, and where the lessons for today become crystal clear. Running an empire is extraordinarily expensive. By the 2nd century after Christ, Rome was stretched to its breaking point. Legions had to be paid along thousands of miles of frontier. Roads, aqueducts, and public buildings required constant maintenance. Wars with Germanic tribes, Parthians in the east, and rebellions within the empire drained the treasury faster than taxes could fill it. Military expenses alone consumed between 40% and 50% of the empire's entire budget, even during peacetime. When you factor in the bribes paid to barbarian chieftains, the expansion of the army by nearly 1/3 in just 1 century, and the increasing reliance on expensive cavalry units, the numbers become staggering. The empire was burning through money faster than it could collect it. So emperors turned to a solution that seemed brilliant at the time, but would ultimately prove catastrophic. They began quietly reducing the silver content in the denarius. The numbers tell a devastating story. Under Emperor Augustus, who ruled at the dawn of the empire, the denarius contained about 95% silver. It was real money, backed by real value. By the reign of Caracalla in the early 3rd century, that figure had dropped to around 50%. By the time of Emperor Gallienus, in the mid-200s, the denarius contained less than 5% silver. A coin once made of precious metal had become little more than bronze with a silver coating. The people could see and feel the difference. Coins that once rang with the clear tone of silver now sounded dull when dropped. They felt lighter, looked different, and merchants began to notice. What happened next was inevitable: inflation. Prices rose because money was no longer anchored to real value. A measure of wheat that once cost a single denarius suddenly required dozens. This wasn't abstract economic theory. It destroyed the lives of ordinary Romans. Soldiers demanded higher wages to cover rising costs. Merchants stopped accepting debased coins, preferring barter or payments in gold. Local economies reverted to direct trade because the currency could no longer be trusted. Emperor Caracalla provides a perfect example of how this spiral accelerated. Between 211 and 217 after Christ, he implemented a series of policies that seemed designed to destroy the monetary system. He raised soldiers' pay by 50%, while simultaneously debasing the coins used to pay them. He introduced the double denarius, a fraudulent coin worth twice the face value of a regular denarius, but containing only 1.5 times the silver. He even granted citizenship to nearly everyone in the empire, not out of generosity, but to expand the tax base and squeeze more revenue from his subjects. Caracalla famously declared, "Nobody should have any money but I. so that I may bestow it upon the soldiers." This statement reveals the fundamental misunderstanding that would doom Rome: the belief that emperors could create wealth simply by manipulating money. The more confidence eroded, the more emperors struck cheaper coins, hoping volume would replace value. It was a vicious cycle that has repeated in countless inflations since. As the crisis deepened, the empire entered what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century, nearly 50 years of chaos between 235 and 284 after Christ. During this period, Rome suffered invasions, plagues, civil wars, and complete economic breakdown. Emperors rose and fell at dizzying speed, sometimes reigning only months before being assassinated. Behind the political drama was a broken financial system that could no longer support the weight of empire. The collapse wasn't just monetary, it was social. As taxes became impossible to pay in worthless coins, the burden fell increasingly on farmers and the middle class. Bureaucrats used their positions to avoid taxation, leaving ordinary citizens to shoulder the load. Many people couldn't bear the pressure and fled their land, seeking protection from wealthy estate owners in exchange for becoming essentially serfs. This content is for educational purposes only and does not constitute financial, legal, or investment advice. This transformation from free citizens to dependent serfs didn't happen overnight, but it became irreversible once the monetary foundation cracked. The Roman middle class, the backbone of any stable economy, simply vanished. Small farmers, artisans, and merchants who had once formed the productive heart of the empire found themselves caught between impossible tax demands and worthless money. The government's response to this crisis reveals another pattern that echoes through history. When monetary policy fails, authorities double down with increasingly desperate measures. Emperor Diocletian, who ruled from 284 to 305 after Christ, decided the problem wasn't debased currency, but greedy merchants raising prices. In 301, he issued one of history's most notorious economic edicts, the Edict on Maximum Prices. This decree fixed the cost of over 1,300 goods and services throughout the empire. Bread, wine, labor wages, even legal fees. Everything was assigned a maximum price that could not be exceeded under penalty of death. Diocletian blamed merchants and traders for the inflation, calling them speculators and thieves in the edict's preamble. He compared them to the barbarians threatening the empire's borders. But price controls can't fix what currency debasement has broken. When money is worthless, no law can force people to accept it at artificial rates. The results were predictable and devastating. Producers stopped bringing goods to market rather than sell at government-mandated losses. Those who continued to trade moved underground, creating massive black markets. Official commerce collapsed while illegal trade flourished. The very goods Diocletian tried to make affordable became scarcer and more expensive than ever. Within 4 years, the emperor who had promised to restore Roman prosperity was forced to abdicate, overwhelmed by the economic chaos his policies had created. His successors kept many of his failed measures in place, unable to understand why controlling prices hadn't controlled inflation. This period reveals something crucial about economic collapse. It's not just numbers on ledgers or abstract market forces. It's human suffering on an enormous scale. Families that had prospered for generations watched their savings become worthless overnight. Skilled craftsmen found their wages couldn't buy basic necessities. Farmers abandoned fields they could no longer afford to work. The social fabric that had held the empire together for centuries began to unravel. Trust in institutions, in currency, in the future itself, evaporated. Without trust, complex economic systems cannot function. Trade networks that had connected the Mediterranean world for hundreds of years fragmented into local barter economies. By the mid-3rd century, prices had risen nearly 1,000% in most parts of the empire. The denarius contained less than 0.5% silver, essentially worthless metal tokens that fooled no one. Any meaningful trade that survived was conducted through barter or with foreign gold coins that still held value. Military units began demanding payment in goods rather than coins. Soldiers who had once been proud to serve for denarii now insisted on grain, clothing, and supplies. Some legions simply abandoned their posts when promised wages arrived as bags of nearly worthless bronze discs. The empire's response was to raise taxes even higher, demanding payment in the very coins that had lost all credibility. When citizens couldn't pay, tax collectors seized property, livestock, and crops. The burden fell heaviest on those least able to bear it, farmers and small business owners who formed the productive base of the economy. Wealthy elites, meanwhile, had long since moved their wealth into land, foreign currency, and real assets that couldn't be debased by imperial decree. They often benefited from the chaos, acquiring property from desperate citizens at fraction of its former value. This created a feedback loop that accelerated the collapse. As the middle class disappeared, tax revenues fell even further. The government responded by debasing coins more severely and raising tax rates higher, driving more people into poverty and dependency. The transformation was complete. Rome had evolved from a republic of citizen farmers into a feudal system where most people worked as serfs on vast estates owned by a tiny aristocratic class. This wasn't the result of barbarian conquest or natural disaster. It was the inevitable outcome of monetary destruction. What makes this story so relevant today is how familiar the patterns feel. The belief that governments can create wealth by manipulating money. The conviction that price controls can solve inflation caused by currency debasement. The assumption that complex economic problems have simple political solutions. Rome's monetary collapse teaches us that empires don't fall from external threats alone. They crumble when leaders sacrifice long-term stability for short-term solutions. The denarius that once symbolized Roman power became a symbol of imperial delusion, proving that no government can create wealth by debasing its currency. The patterns we've explored, currency debasement, inflation, failed price controls, and the destruction of the middle class, didn't end with Rome. They've repeated throughout history, from Weimar Germany to modern Zimbabwe, because the temptations that destroyed Roman money remain as powerful today as they were 2,000 years ago. Understanding these cycles isn't about predicting doom. It's about recognizing how monetary systems work and why they fail. When you know the warning signs, you can better navigate economic uncertainty and make informed decisions about your financial future. Rome's greatest lesson may be this: money is trust made tangible. And when that trust breaks, everything else follows. The empire that conquered the world couldn't conquer the basic laws of economics, and neither can anyone else. If this exploration of economic history gave you a new perspective on how money and power intersect, subscribe for more deep dives into the forces that shape our world. History may not repeat exactly, but it certainly rhymes, and those who understand the rhythm are better prepared for whatever comes next.